Good afternoon. My name is Dennis Speed, and on behalf of the LaRouche Political Action Committee, I want to welcome you to today's Saturday Socratic Dialogue with LaRouche. We have a particular topic that we want to take up because of the way in which we have experienced a new dynamic in American organizing, political organizing, on the streets of America and in the context of several different emerging conflicts worldwide. The topic, as we're loosely calling it, is the committees of correspondence, how to use scientific ideas to power a new movement for progress. Now, for people that have viewed our webcast before, they know that we've been talking about this idea of committees of correspondence, which is an adaptation of something that existed in the period prior to the American Revolution. And this refers to something that is often identified with Sam Adams, and to some degree with Ben Franklin, but basically represents a time in the country when, prior to there being a United States, persons who recognized that the time had come to define a new road for humanity decided that they were going to band together, and that their banding together was not a Jacobin action of protest against injustice. It involved a very long, a very extensive set of correspondences, of discussions, of debates, of dialogues. And these went on actually over a period of not only years, but notably decades when you look at particularly Ben Franklin's role in the actual committees. In the United States today, we think that it's necessary to rise above the idea of party and faction, and above the idea emphatically of identity politics. Obviously, recently, President Donald Trump, on several occasions, has attempted to advance a set of policies and conceptions that are being bitterly opposed by British imperial interests. We're going to say a lot about this during the course of the afternoon, but what we want to do in order to give people who are viewing an idea of what it is we think has to be brought into existence in form of an actual form of dialogue and discussion in the United States, is we're going to try to manifest that or show that or demonstrate that. And therefore, we're going to have several short presentations made to you today which intend to get that across. When Lyndon LaRouche used to, prior to his having passed away, particularly in February of this year, when he used to address this meeting, he often gave very short openings followed by questions and answers. We're going to do something a bit different than that. We're going to have several different reflections on the organizing process that are going to be presented by several of us. I'll be followed here in a few minutes by Diane Sayre. And then you'll hear from others of us. And then we will, from that point, ask for questions and discussion from the audience as a whole. We're going to begin today with an in memoriam video because we learned this morning that someone who attended these meetings regularly, Mr. Bill Monroe, passed away this morning. He was a veteran of the Second World War. He landed on Omaha Beach, and he had a very particular interaction with the people of France and of Belgium. He had the chance to meet Charles de Gaulle in a discussion that happened between himself and de Gaulle and the mayor of Sainte-Mère-Église. He was given an award by the people of France on, June 6th of this year. This is the 75th anniversary of the landing at the Normandy invasion. And he prepared a very short farewell speech, if you want to put it that way, on June 5th, which you're going to hear, and we're going to show you a video in commemoration of him right now. Okay, Bill, we are now recording.
Okay. I want to say hi to everybody. I hope that my little speech here will be of benefit to someone. It's been a long, hard journey, but I have survived. I say to anybody at this particular time, keep on trying. Don't give up. Don't despair. Okay? All right.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
I want to clarify, the first shot you saw was State Assemblyman Gordon Johnson, who was holding a letter that was given to Bill Monroe with the commendation of the medal, which was given to him on the occasion of the 75th anniversary of the landing at Normandy. So what I want to do right now is to have Diane come, and she's going to be doing a briefing, and then following that, we'll begin. Actually, one thing I almost forgot that I do want to say and do before we do that, excuse me if I realize we should do this in this order, is we have a 1-minute video of our founder and the founder of these meetings, Lyndon LaRouche, who is going to warn about something that he warned about at that time that is also happening again right now. I think it's probably best to show this before Diane comes, and what she has to say will make it clear why the particular warning you're hearing about, which is from July 25th, 2007, could have been given yesterday, and it's necessary for it to be given again now.
It occurs at a time where the world monetary financial system is actually now currently in the process of disintegrating. Nothing mysterious about this. I've talked about it for some time. It's been in progress. It's not abating. What's listed as stock values and market values in the financial markets internationally is bunk. These are purely fictitious beliefs. There's no truth to it. The fakery is enormous. There is no possibility of a non-collapse of the present financial system. None. It's finished now. The present financial system cannot continue to exist under any circumstances, under any presidency, under any leadership, or any leadership of nations. Only a fundamental and sudden change in the world monetary financial system will prevent a general, immediate, chain reaction type of collapse. At what speed, we don't know, but it will go on, and it will be unstoppable.
Okay, well, he's right, and I'll say more about that later. Helga Zepp-LaRouche, Mr. LaRouche's widow, has been very, very clear that we are at a major turning point. And the issue is the new paradigm versus the breakdown, disintegration of the previous British liberal imperial system, I guess you could call it. And I'll say more about that, but I want to put in context what I'm about to show you. Where is that little thing? Oh, here. Okay. Which is, remember, in 2013, Chinese President Xi Jinping announced an initiative, the One Belt, One Road initiative, which now has over 120 nations in it. I'm just telling you this because it's very important to put in context the reaction. I had the opportunity over the last weeks to review the 35 projects which were agreed upon at a meeting of 37 or so heads of state at the Belt and Road Initiative Forum held in Beijing in April. And it was really a terrible mistake that the United States did not participate in that on a head of state level. Megan Beats, who's here with me, and I and others put together a package which I presented here, which you may be familiar with, the bitter truth about the U.S. economy. We were not skipping the Beijing forum because the United States is doing so brilliantly and we don't need it. but because there is an ongoing British-run coup against the President of the United States, and there's been a 50-plus year coup ongoing since the assassination of Kennedy, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, Bobby Kennedy, and the promotion of what you could call the rock, drug, sex counterculture in the United States to turn us from a scientific, industrial, optimistic, revolutionary power into a country which has an enormous military but does not have the culture needed, as General Douglas MacArthur commented, and as Kraft Erica said, science and technological progress are not everything. You have to have a culture for these things, so that we have had a terrible collapse. What Mr. LaRouche was just saying was in no way an exaggeration. And many Americans are somewhat delusional because they think that the stock market is an indicator of prosperity or success or the amount of money that we've printed, and that is simply not true. At any rate, we're now at the point where this bubble of garbage is going to implode, explode. I don't know if it works like a supernova or how it's going to happen, but it cannot be sustained. And you already have an incredible movement led by China, where huge projects, I mean, absolutely enormous projects. One of the ones that I thought was really fun is speaking of Kashmir, and we'll get to that later, but Nepal and places like that, a tunnel under Mount Everest to connect parts of the world. The president of Egypt, al-Sisi, is promoting an initiative which would make the entire Nile River navigable from Lake Victoria, with perhaps some canals interspersed all the way up to the Mediterranean. You have to think of how huge these things are, and no one in the United States knows anything about this, but it's already happening. So the British are coming in a last-minute, totally desperate effort to destroy this, and they're having to come out in their own name. So I'm just going to go through a number of these areas of crisis, and you can think about really the desperation that it exposes, but the dangerous. The first we've been hearing a great deal about is Hong Kong, where you see these protesters. They took over the airport. They are violent. They are waving British and American flags. They are singing the U.S. national anthem. There's another map here, I think. Yeah, but anyway, can I go backwards? We'll just leave it there. At any rate, now imagine that 5,000 people occupy JFK Airport, and they started waving Russian flags and singing the Russian national anthem. And then President Putin sent out a tweet telling President Trump, "I'm sure if you meet with these people that you can solve this." I mean, it would be, you couldn't possibly do it in those terms. The purpose of this is to divide the United States and China, the two largest economies of the world, and to make it very, very clear, and I was delighted that she did so, and it shows that the people controlling Hillary Clinton haven't learned anything, because she continues to be hanging out there in an obvious way. She put out a tweet where she says, "Let's all stand with the people of Hong Kong as they speak out for democracy, freedom from repression, and a world they long to see." Now, I love this because I noticed on Facebook that since somebody gave, or there's probably a few Americans, or maybe it's Brits, singing the anthem and waving the flag around, all these Tea Party and pro-Trump groups immediately saw this and said, "Oh, the Hong Kong protesters, they have more respect for the American flag than the football teams. And, you know, this is so great, and we've got to support Hong Kong." So maybe these people who think they want to support Trump should think twice if Hillary Clinton is fully behind this upsurge. And also, how did Hong Kong become separate anyway? It was the British and the British Opium Wars. So what kind of person is going to be clamoring to go back into the arms of the power that killed millions of people with their drug trade. So now the China People's Daily, they have a video up on YouTube, and I really recommend people find it. I guess it's on RT as well. It already has 166,000 views. And it's a video of Hillary Clinton praising what happened in Syria, praising what happened in Libya, and warning that people might want to think twice before they embrace her initiative to intervene in their countries. Next, this is a slightly odd angle, but you can see Pakistan, India, and then, does this have a pointer in here? Oh, there it is. Yeah, okay. So Kashmir. And what has occurred, probably related to a discussion about the U.S. withdrawing troops from Afghanistan, is that a change was made from India and the status of Kashmir. And you have enormous tension between two major nuclear powers. And it should be noted that Pakistan also there's a project which we've talked about, CPEC, the China Pakistan Economic Corridor. I'm just showing you with this dot kind of roughly. It's a transport corridor from China down to the port of Gwadar, which the Chinese have leased, I think, for 50 years. Which is very, very major, will transform the whole region. That project could be endangered by this tension. It's very alarming, it's significant. These things could all be solved, by the way, if the US, Russia, China, and India were in the kind of four-power agreement that we'll be discussing. Okay, here is Afghanistan. Again, very tricky. What will be the role of the Taliban? How is this going to work? And again, the question of economic development to solve these, replace the opium trade as the major economic activity and so on. These things are very important. Iran, people know, and apparently the Iranian vessel that was seized at the port of Gibraltar is about to be released, but needed repairs and so on. But it, again, very tense, very dangerous. Look how many nations, we tend not to think about this in the United States because we have Canada on the north and Mexico to our south, but look how many nations border Iran and what they are. And think about the importance of Iran and these other nations as part of the corridor of the Silk Road of trade between Asia and Europe. Syria, another country where the United States never was given permission to be there. We are there. We're supposedly carving out corridors with Turkey and northeastern Syria. You have a very difficult situation in Idlib, which is still somewhat controlled by ISIS with new beheadings and things going on. They have done a remarkable job, thanks to Russia's intervention, of reconstruction and rebuilding, but again, a very crucial hotspot. Then, are there more slides there after that one? I'm not sure. Let me see. No. Okay. Anyway, I would just add for your consideration, Moscow, demonstrations, colored revolution. Now it's absurd. Putin has about an 87% popularity rate, so the idea of trying to overthrow him is ridiculous, but nonetheless, they will try. Venezuela, which is another place where you have threats of regime change and massive destabilization. Somalia, another place where we're apparently still killing large numbers of people with drones and so on. So relative to 120 nations being part of the Belt and Road, which overlap these, you could say, well, it's not that many countries, but it is countries that are very strategically located, very populous, and the main purpose of the British is the old notion, divide and conquer. Stop the U.S. from working with China. Stop the U.S. from working with Russia. If you think about the inverse, when President Trump went to Osaka for the G20 meeting and he met with Putin and he met with Xi Jinping and he met with Modi and he met with Abe, coming immediately out of that, you had the next very positive step with North Korea. So the ability of these presidents to meet is crucial. Now, do you have my slides? What is going to happen here very soon is, does anyone know who that is? Greta Thunberg. And she is the 16-year-old climate warrior, the founder of the Fridays for the Future. No one should bother to be in school because you could be dead in 12 years. She is a victim of child abuse, I would say, by a mother who is probably a super egotistical opera singer, diva who wanted her daughter to be a star, and she developed certain psychological problems, which her younger sister also suffers from. So I think you can blame the mother, but she is on her way here on a sailboat, which also has some kind of solar something or other in case they can't get the winds right. She won't fly because that is bad for the environment. And she's going to be speaking at the UN General Assembly. So you have to ask yourself, how does this 16-year-old girl get the ability to do that? Also, you should know if you want to spend $800, you can purchase a raincoat like that, or I don't know if that's the one, but they have special rain gear for their trip over here. Now, the raincoats probably cost that much because the ultimate aim of this is to bail out the financial system. And you probably are, I hope people here are familiar with the manifesto that came from the El Paso school shooter, where he explicitly says that it's called The Inconvenient Truth, off of Al Gore's book, An Inconvenient Truth. And he basically says that people are consuming way too many resources and the only solution is to get rid of the people. I'm going to read you something from this document. Open letter on climate-related financial risks. There is something now called the Network for Greening the Financial Services Organization. It's 34 major banks. Lest you think that, what I would like you to consider is that what goes on Wall Street is not just greed, but really evil, really destructive, really hateful of what is required for actual human growth and development. This is a little snip from a letter that they put out on the 17th of April, 2019. Quote, the catastrophic, and you see who wrote it, I'll just say, the governor of the Bank of England, Mark Carney, governor of the Banque de France, Francois Villeroy de Gallo, and the chair of the Network for Greening the Financial Services, Frank Elderson. Here we go. The catastrophic effects of climate change are already visible around the world, from blistering heat waves in North America, which we had not had any of in April, I'll say, but at any rate, to typhoons in Southeast Asia and droughts in Africa and Australia. No country or community is immune. These events damage infrastructure and private property, negatively affect health, decrease productivity, and destroy wealth, and they are extremely costly. Insured losses have risen fivefold in the past 3 decades. The enormous human and financial costs of climate change are having a devastating effect on our collective well-being. Please don't remember that there were glaciers and other major climate changes that went on this planet and have been going on for at least 5 billion years or so. Then they go on. The primary responsibility for climate policy will continue to sit with governments, and the private sector will determine the success of the adjustment, but as financial policy makers and prudential supervisors, we cannot ignore the obvious risks before our eyes. That is why 34 central banks and supervisors representing 5 continents, half of the global greenhouse gas emissions, and the supervision of 2/3 of the global systemically important banks and insurers. Those are the too big to fail banks and too big to jail. Joined forces in 2017 to create a coalition of the willing, the Network for Greening the Financial System. So if you wonder how it is that this little 16-year-old girl seems to have so much resources behind her, it's because the entire 34 of the mega banks of the world are backing this. because one, they believe in depopulation and genocide, especially against poor people, and number two, they are desperate to figure out how to bail out a bubble which is getting ready to burst. And the last thing I will just say is that if you think about what occurred in the wake of the El Paso shooting, President Trump was blamed for it, as people know, that he was a racist, that he used the word invasion, and that's what caused this. And this is stated very clearly to be phase 2 of the coup, because the Russiagate part of it completely fell apart and didn't work. And Robert Mueller doesn't seem to be terribly fit these days to be doing much of anything, so they have to move on to something else. What was in the British House of Lords report from 2018, where they say that President Donald Trump serving a second term is unacceptable because he will ruin the U.S.-British special relationship, and they explicitly mention that Trump withdrew the United States from the COP21, the Paris Climate Accord agreements. So the fact that the president has not been willing to be part of this genocide is one of the main things that the House of Lords of Britain, that is the official British government policy, says that he is such a menace and a threat. So I think I will leave it at that for where we are.
Great. So what we're going to be doing in terms of a form of dialogue around this is to try to now bring some other voices in. Just for those who are interested, on the report that was mentioned by Diane, the British House of Lords report, that section specifically states, and this is just a quote from it, the U.S. administration has taken a number of high-profile, unilateral foreign policy decisions that are contrary to the interests of the United Kingdom. In particular, U.S. withdrawal from the Paris Agreement on Climate Change. The difficulty that the United Kingdom and its allies have faced in trying to influence the United States demonstrates the challenge of working with the administration. Should President Trump win a second term, or a similar administration succeed him, the damage to U.S.-UK relations will be longer lasting, and the government will need to place less reliance on reaching a common U.S.-UK approach to the main issues of the day than has often been the case in the past. Now, I think all of our associates know that a couple weeks ago we published a white paper, and that white paper is dedicated entirely to the idea of, first of all, explaining and expanding the recent proposal made by President Trump, reiterated by President Trump on the 4th of July, that the United States return to the moon and go to Mars, but that it would also begin a process of collaboration with other nations to that end. In a discussion we had this morning, Helga Sepp-LaRouche emphasized that the space component itself, however, should be thought about as a derivative of a broader agreement among 4 powers in particular: Russia, China, India, the United States, but not exclusive to those powers. Obviously, all other nations that are interested in the idea of space, and of the idea of advanced technologies associated with the space program, should become part of that. And she said that the idea is that we in the United States need to think about what we want to do here to actually make this a living part of not merely what President Trump is thinking, but all of the American people. So the preparation of that pamphlet was done by our basement team to tell you not only about the pamphlet, but also about what this notion is of this higher conception of policy. We have Jason Ross.
Right. So to continue on this path, I want to say a little bit more about what Greta Thunberg represents, what this represents overall, get into the 6 points of our pamphlet on space, and then talk about what that means internationally about an understanding of science. To some countries around the world, the advancement of science that took place from Europe in what's called the West is so rapid, so shocking that it grabs people's imagination. And of course, people then want to say, well, I want to do that too. I want to get in on this science. I want to understand this. And what's very important to know is that Western culture, there is no such thing, Western culture, it's like one word, it's kind of a misnomer. Culture in the West, if you even want to use the phrase the West, like anywhere, is a fight. People are presented a British view of science in the West, which seems just kind of like a train of developments and thoughts. The steps were unavoidable. They're all advancements on each other. That's not true. Just like music, where sure there were advancements and then a jumping off the cliff with the creation of modernist crap or just ugly garbage, the same thing happened in science. If you ask yourself, where has the recent Einstein been? You know, 100 years ago, science was totally overturned by the work of Max Planck and Albert Einstein. Where are the modern Einsteins? Is it that science is getting harder, or is it that our idea of what science is actually throwing people off the track to discoveries they could be making? So that's what I'd like to talk about. So those are good. Okay. So one thing I got to say, you know, Greta, this whole Greta thing, you just got to love it. It's sort of, if you want to tell people, you know what? Yes, the economy's been getting worse physically for decades in the United States in terms of how many jobs you got to work, how many hours you got to work to pay for your typical bills. If you want to pay for your housing, okay, how many jobs do you have to work? If you'd like to have a little bit of money left over after that to buy some food, okay, how many more hours do you have to work? If on top of that, you're one of these weird people who also wants health insurance and maybe even to buy some clothes sometimes, that kind of thing, how much do you have to work? It's not just getting harder in New York City, which is, of course, a very expensive location here. This is something that's taking place nationally because the way that the labor force exists has been changing over decades, away from productive jobs where people who, when they go to work, are actually producing something of value. And then, of course, they can be paid something that represents the value that they have physically brought to society. A lot of those jobs, those are gone. If you think about the typical jobs that people engage in, how many of them are immoral? And I don't just mean the ones you might typically think are immoral, like, I don't know, hitman, heroin dealer. How many people working a little bit further south in this city are actually doing something immoral with their day-to-day work? On Wall Street, for example. How many jobs are just useless? Paper pushers, people going to work saying, what am I doing here? This isn't useful. I'm going to spend half of my waking adult life doing this. At least I get paid, but I don't feel like I'm achieving anything. So this is what we've had. We've had this shift. So now the idea is that to get people to accept that, you actually say that it's virtuous, it's holy. You're practically going to become a saint if you are poor. Specifically because poor basically means the same thing as green. You want to be environmentally friendly? Here's an easy way. Be poor. If you don't buy things, hey, you're really green. Can't afford an airplane ticket? You're really green. Or if you can really afford it, you want to go across the ocean but you don't want to fly? Be friendly to the environment. Just find a friend with a yacht that costs millions of dollars. No trouble, right? We can all do that. Then we can all be green. Okay. Bring your own damn bags to the grocery store to put your food in. Like, they can't just give you a bag themselves. That's really green. How convenient to carry bags around. I mean, really, you know? So, saying poverty's good. You're a very virtuous person. That's just great. Can't afford meat? Green. Very good. So let's talk about what we're going to do in terms of actually creating growth so we don't all have to be so poor. And then we're going to talk about what this means about science. So we have released a beautiful pamphlet that I hope everyone has read, enjoyed, and shared the contents of with their friends. We commit to the Moon-Mars mission, the true spark for changing the culture. This is based around a petition that we are asking people to sign, a petition to Donald Trump and to our fellow citizens of the United States and the world. Very briefly, going to go over the 6 points in this, and then come back to that science theme. Point number 1. Wait, oh, there it is. Okay. December 11th, 2017. Donald Trump is signing Space Policy Directive 1. I don't think many people heard about this when it happened. There's some people there. Standing to our right, not the guy with the yellow tie, but the guy next to him who's really smiling, that was the astronaut on the last mission to the moon. That's Harrison Jack Schmitt, geologist. Sitting on the table, you see that jar there next to the president? You know what's going on with that? Is that like a vase someone forgot to put a flower in? Or? Inside that container is a piece of the moon. Okay? So he signed this space policy directive saying that we're going to go back to the moon. Now, that might not seem like much. Really, it was only a couple of paragraphs, basically said the US is sending people to the moon. What makes that so big is that for a couple of decades, we have not had a space policy. We haven't had one. Okay, we used to have a space shuttle. We don't have that anymore. What was our big space dream under Clinton? Anyone remember? Is it because some of us are too young, or maybe there really wasn't one? Not inhaling? Okay. How about under Bush? Does anyone remember Bush's space initiative? He had one. Yeah. Bush said, we got Constellation, we're going to go out into space, the moon and Mars. Didn't fight for the funding for it. It made some progress. Did you hear about Bush's plan to land on the sun? People heard about this one already? Oh, I'm going to have to repeat it. I'm sorry. So, Bush was talking with his advisors, and he said, we really ought to do something that no one's done before. We're going to land on the sun. And his advisors said, they were used to this. He said these things all the time in their meetings, so they knew how to handle them. They said, well, Mr. President, it's a little bit hot on the sun, and that might not be the best idea. And he said, well, that's no trouble. We'll go at nighttime. That was the Bush space program. Now, his program wasn't all that, but Obama decided, well, we're not going at all. So that Constellation program with the Orion crew capsule that was being worked on, and work was being made on developing a replacement for the space shuttle under Bush. It was happening. Obama said, we really don't need that. About going to the moon, what did Obama say? Been there, done that. Okay, this isn't like going to Disney World again or something. This is going to the moon. You can't been there, done that. We didn't done that. We just landed a few times. That's not done, right? So Obama said, no, we're going to do something different. We're going to land on an asteroid. Okay, not really land on an asteroid. We're going to go near an asteroid and maybe pick up some dirt from it. And NASA knew that this was just, nothing was going to happen. And indeed, nothing happened. People are like, all right, well, when he's out of office, maybe we'll actually do something again. So Trump comes into office, and he says what's kind of, what's clearly the right next step. Go back to the moon with people. And then he expanded on this to say, as a way of building up towards going to Mars. So it seems kind of simple, but it's amazing that the president is doing that. We hadn't had that recently. It's big news. It's a good thing. So first step is Project Artemis. Trump said by 2024, by the end of his presumed second term, we're going to have people on the moon. The next Americans. Next man, first woman. That's what he says. So this is the Orion crew capsule rocketing towards the moon in 2024. On board are the next people to land on the surface of the moon. This is planned out. This is great. Here's some of the steps that are involved in terms of flying unmanned craft to the moon, flying people around the moon, like in the Apollo era, and then actually landing on the moon, with the first permanent equipment in 2028 is the plan, to start building up a lunar base. Now, why do we want to build up a lunar base? Let's talk about lunar industrialization. There's a good reason for that. If we're living on the moon, for one thing, we can do science on the moon if we're there. That's very important. If you want to say, I'd like to do a different kind of experiment, you can make what you need right there if you've got people and equipment. You don't have to design it, put it in a rocket, ship it over and all this. You can just do it right there. So we need science cities. We need people to support science. And if we're going to go beyond the moon, this is the place to produce things. It's easy to get off the moon. Gravity is much less. Less than 10% the energy cost to get up off the moon as to getting off the Earth. Great place. Also, what's in that dirt? All this lovely dirt that these people are walking on. They're trampling on a powerful resource. They're just stepping on it. Inside that dirt is solar wind. So the sun is, it's kind of a funny word. If you're in space, you don't really feel like, you know, wind blowing from the sun. But you get a lot of stuff shooting out of the sun. By the way, what's going on in the sun anyway? Anyone know what's fusion? So what does that mean? What's happening in the sun? Hydrogen's bumping into itself, becoming helium. All sorts of things are being shot out of the sun. Well, among all those things being shot out of the sun includes a certain kind of helium, helium-3. It's the perfect fuel for nuclear fusion. Now, as exciting as it might be to put solar panels on the roof of a building, to have enough electricity to maybe run the washing machine if you've got a battery attached to it, what's even more exciting is a power source that's 1 million times more energetic than petroleum. That, to me, that's a little bit more exciting than windmills, which you want to talk about been there, done that. Windmills, been there, done that. Okay, we don't need those anymore. We can move on. We do need that fancy new fusion. So we get this helium-3 from the moon. Actually, that picture, I'm not sure how it relates. This is what we got. This is what we got to do on the moon. So it's in the dirt. We can pull it out of the dirt. We can use it as this great fuel, and that's going to power us. If we want to get out to Mars in a reasonable period of time, we can't do it with chemical rockets. If you go with chemical rockets, it's going to take you a whole long time, many, many months. The people on the craft, they might get sick of each other by then. As you're getting further from the Earth, it's harder to talk to people on the Earth. The delay is getting longer and longer. So, you know, it might be challenging going a trip that long. You better hope you have good health. And when you land on Mars, you know you're going to have bad health because that's what happens to astronauts in space for that long. They're in bad shape by the end. So don't send people to Mars where they're just going to land and feel like crap and then eventually come back. Get there in a week or two. Use nuclear fusion. That's the only way to make it worth it. Otherwise, don't send people to Mars. It's just, it's kind of sick. Okay. Let's talk about the economic payback. Unlike, let's see here, there's a lot of ways you could throw your money away. But what are some ways people throw away money? That they don't, they spend it, they don't get anything back from it. The lottery, there you go. Some people say that's a tax on people who can't do math. I don't think that's the best way to describe it. What are some other ways you could throw away your money? No one here? Oh, everyone here is very, okay, that's great. No problems here. Yelling, what's that? Bailing out Wall Street. That's a waste. Spend a lot of money, don't get much out of that. Sometimes people join a gym and then they never go. That's throwing away some money. What else? Consuming junk food. Yeah, you get less than nothing if you eat poison. That's not a good thing to spend your money on. So there's a lot of things you put money in and you don't really get anything out of it. Now, when you spend your money not on some stuff like Cheetos or bankers' vacations, but you spend it on what makes us human beings, meaning discovery, science, knowledge, well, then you're investing in the human species. So if you put money into developing nuclear fusion, if you put money into space, first off, that money, it gets spent right here. We don't send money into space. When we went to the moon, the payback was measured as at least 10 to 1. And that's not even a good measure. It's more than that. This is something that will drive the economy forward. LaRouche, in a 1988 paper where he talked about his program for going to the moon and Mars, he said that by the middle of this century, by 2050, a time that the United Nations is saying we should have no carbon dioxide emissions at all, instead of the vision of being carbon-free, LaRouche's vision, he said by 2050, the economy should be about 40 times stronger than it was in 1988. If you want to imagine how you were living in 1988, increase your income, let's say by 40 times, what would that be like? Now, that has happened in history. Imagine the development of the industrial era. Steam power. You don't have to have people or animals doing things. This is like 10 times improvement in the economy. So that's what we could have had. If we had fusion, we don't have to worry about resources. We got plenty of water in the oceans. We don't have to worry about mining anymore. It's easy to process even plain dirt to get the metals that we need. People aren't dying in mines or looking around for fracking to find some oil they can somehow get into or some natural gas. We're done with all that. Our health is better. Our education is great. We're learning how to sing in school. When people, you go to a restaurant and people are singing happy birthday to you and it sounds terrible, that won't happen anymore. It'll sound great. Among the many benefits of the future. Okay, so.
They won't be singing that song.
No, you're right. That's right. They won't be singing happy birthday to you. They'll be singing something much better. That's what we can hope for by 2050. Now, to do that, we're going to have to reform the world financial system because, as we all know, it is just completely screwed up. We all know that money is going where it shouldn't, that Wall Street gets whatever it wants. This is wrong, and we're going to stop that. So that's our fifth point in our platform here. That's going to mean, taking on Wall Street and doing it internationally. LaRouche says you got to get Russia, China, India, United States. Those 4 countries together. Now, that doesn't include England or France, I hope you noticed, or Germany. Get those countries together and say, hey, we're not going to have an economy based on money. We're going to have an economy based on economy. Physical things that help people live better. Whoa. Okay. And the last thing is we need to work internationally in space. Right now, there's this really stupid law that prevents NASA from working with the Chinese on human beings in space. Yeah, because China's going to steal our technology. That's the idea. Now, so this is something China, now tell me when China stole this. This is China's lander on the far side of the moon. Now, we've never landed anything on the far side of the moon. Where did they steal? Did they steal this from Area 51? Maybe it was just there the whole time, ready to go, and the Chinese stole it. No, look, we should work with other countries. The idea isn't really that, Chinese people are scary and bad and thieving or something like this. What's going on is it's a British outlook about human beings that says, my self-interest as a human being, says the Queen, who wears crowns and sits on gold and this kind of thing. Her value of herself as a human being, is it that she's writing beautiful poetry? Is she making beautiful paintings that make people feel good about themselves and inspired about what human beings can do? Is she working on a science lab in her basement? What is she doing? She's wearing silly clothes. She's preventing the development of the world. She's continuing colonialism. One of the biggest ways to continue colonialism right now, environmentalism. Official colonialism, a lot of these, colonizing powers like England and France, kicked out in the 60s. What's still there? Environmentalism. So, if your self-identity is being number one, well, if someone else is doing well, and you're like that, kind of dumb kid on the playground who thinks, I got to be number one, if that's your identity, then others rise as a threat to you. That's a stupid way to think. So we got to throw that out, recognize that it's just possible that China, which has many times more people than the United States, sit down for this, might have a more powerful economy than the United States. It could happen. Why wouldn't it? Okay, so that's it on this front. So just the last thing I said I was going to talk about is about what science means. Because I got to say, China has got, to pick at China in particular, China's got a lot of confidence right now. So there's certain areas where China is totally confident on the world stage saying, hey, you have your idea, we've got our idea, and we're just going to put out our idea. We're not worried that it's not good enough. We're not worried that you're probably smarter and have a better idea. No, we're going to put forward our idea. So on the economy, China's very comfortable with this. At certain points, they didn't have a very good system some decades ago under the Great Leap Forward. That didn't work very well. The Cultural Revolution wasn't so hot. But China's economy is absolutely doing great right now. So they can say, okay, the World Bank has its ideas, but we have our ideas. We have the Belt and Road Initiative, and we're going to do it. One of the areas, I'm just going to say, that China doesn't feel that kind of confidence, I think, is in science. And there's one very major scientific problem that's gripping the world right now, which is the cult-like, religious-like belief that carbon dioxide is causing a catastrophe in the world. If you ask people who, are convinced of this, and there are many people who are concerned about this, who don't want us to destroy the planet, who think CO2 is going to destroy us all. If you dig down and figure out what the origin of that belief is it the same kind of origin of a belief that Louis Pasteur did when he figured out how to vaccinate against rabies, or when he figured out the germs cause disease, when he really figured something out? That's not why most people think what they think about CO2. It's just hearsay. And what's really important is to recognize that Western, got to put the quotes in there on that, Western science, Western culture, quotes again, is a conflict. So between Plato and Aristotle, a conflict. Between Albert Einstein and Bertrand Russell, a conflict. And what's happened is that over the past 100 years, a pernicious, evil, wrong idea about what science is has crept over the West. That terrible, evil idea is logic. Do computers operate with logic? Sure, that's fine. Okay, great. We can make computers. Does the human mind make a discovery by logic? Is all of thinking following logical rules? Not creative thinking. A creative discovery is illogical. Mr. Spock would never have discovered something new and scientific. So there's more to say about that, but now isn't the time to do it. I'll just end with the pointing towards the connection between an outlook about what science is, which then makes us think about how is our mind connected to the universe that we're studying, which means that talking about what science is can't be really separate from what is a person. How should we think about ourselves and about our relationships with each other? It's not separate from culture. I'll leave that one hanging.
Taking up this issue of culture, because we will often have these kinds of discussions, and what happens is that the organizers are in the street and they're confronted by all sorts of things that are said to them, one of which is, or relates to, the destructive culture that people are living in. How destructive is it? Well, this is the 50th anniversary this weekend of the Woodstock Nation, otherwise called the Woodstock Degeneration. And it's also, this year, it's the 50th anniversary of the Manson killings. It's this group of hippies who seemed to be for love and peace, except that they one night went out and killed 7 people. And one of those hippies, Charles Manson, had been a frequenter at the house of people like the Dennis Wilson of the Beach Boys and Neil Young, and and all these people were the musicians. And everybody was wondering, how do you sort of reconcile such a difference between the hippie and the killers? Well, if there was no difference, there was nothing to reconcile. This is, of course, not a popular position to take in the United States, even today, half a century later. There was, 20 years ago, another killing, the Columbine shootings. 12 students were killed, 1 teacher was killed, and then the 2 shooters committed suicide. There were 15 people killed in that. It was in April of 20 years ago. And there's a talk you can take a look at on TED Talks, by Susan Klebold, the mother of Dylan Klebold, the shooter. She says, "It has taken me years to try to accept my son's legacy. The cruel behavior that defined the end of his life showed me that he was a completely different person from the one I knew. Afterwards, people asked, 'How could you not know? What kind of a mother were you?' I still ask myself these same questions. Before the shootings, I thought of myself as a good mom. Helping my children become caring, healthy, responsible adults was the most important role of my entire life. But the tragedy convinced me that I failed as a parent, and it's partially this sense of failure that brings me here today. Aside from his father, I was the one person who knew and loved Dylan the most. If anyone could have known what was happening, it should have been me, right? But I didn't know. I know that I will live with this tragedy, with these multiple tragedies, for the rest of my life. I know that in the minds of many, what I lost can't compare to what the other families lost. I know that my struggle doesn't make theirs any easier. I know there are even some who think I don't have the right to any pain, but only to a life of permanent penance. In the end, what I know comes down to this. The tragic fact is that even the most vigilant and responsible of us may not be able to help. But for love's sake, we must never stop trying to know the unknowable. There's a lot in between. She discusses the issue of mental health and many other things, her own problems, her own conflicts. But this last statement is something I want to focus on. We must never stop trying to know the unknowable. The human mind is not unknowable. What was in the mind of Dylan Klebold was knowable. But if you're living in a culture that has a completely different emphasis, it's hard to know what your children think. And it's hard to know what somebody like Greta Thunberg actually thinks. And it's hard to predict what the effect of somebody like that arriving in a country like this, where you have shooters like in El Paso, and then somebody else in Dayton the next day, and then 2 or 3 other people captured who also have massive caches of weapons. It's hard to know what those people think they think. That brings us to the idea of the function of classical culture. You know, we, as you know, have the idea of classical choruses, and Mr. Lyndon LaRouche insisted on the creation of a 1,500-person such grouping here in New York City as part of what he referred to as the living memorial to the people that died in 9/11. This was a long period of discussion. It involved several individuals who were in that discussion. But I would suggest to you that there was a big difference between, and I think it's an obvious difference, but it's obviously a difference between the mentality of a 17-year-old or a 25-year-old that commits those killings and a 25-year-old African-American landing on the shore of Omaha Beach, when he's not allowed actually to be a combat veteran, because actually, you know, African Americans were not allowed to be part of the combat units. They were segregated out of those units because of the racism of the American military. However, the Germans that were shooting at the people at Omaha Beach didn't, shall we say, have great regard for that. They weren't that discriminating. And it's important to say something here about this issue of culture and how cultures change. America has been changed over decades by people who set out to change it. The culture of the United States today must be changed, and must be changed dramatically. We've used this principle of the classical chorus to try to do it. And now we're sort of into a section of our discussion where we're going to have people sort of responding to what they've heard. And I'm going to call on various people to do that to get us started, and then we'll see where we go in terms of the questions and answers. So I would like to have Megan Beats, who, besides the fact she's a member of the Basement team, also directs choruses and is a musician herself, and has some thoughts about these matters.
So I'm going to be brief, but I think it's very important to add to this discussion, and especially to what Jason opened up, that the essential issue in the fight that Jason referenced between the two so-called sides of the debate in science is the conception of the nature of man. Is man an ape? Is man just another beast? Or is man something different? Now, if we wish to have a society, a species, which is making the kinds of leaps of scientific progress that our new pamphlet on the Moon Mars mission lays out. And if we wish to have a society that's carrying out a process of unending progress, this absolutely necessitates a beautiful culture. It will be impossible to achieve that without a beautiful culture. And the reason is that the human mind is not the same as the animal mind, or the animal brain, or the computer so-called brain. The human mind does not, as the animal mind, exist purely within the world of the senses. Now, people, I'm sure, know that animals can be trained to do some pretty amazing things. Circus animals, aquarium animals, you all have seen these animals which can be trained to carry out pretty creative-looking tasks, right? However, this is all done by the use and manipulation of sense perception, sense associations. The human mind is not limited to that. Humans have a kind of perception, I'll call it, which is supersensory. And I don't mean that in some kind of strange sixth sense, psychedelic sort of way. The way in which I mean that is that the human mind has something called the power of hypothesis, the power of creative hypothesis, by which we can invent in our own mental processes an idea about a cause in the physical universe. For example, a notion of the existence of what we now call electromagnetism. Who has ever seen electromagnetism itself? Who has ever tasted universal gravitation, right? Or touched the principles that organize the nucleus of the atom? But the mind can have a precise idea of this. Now, the way we know that our ideas, our hypotheses that we invent in the processes of human creative reason correspond to those powers which run the physical universe is that we're able to do stuff with them. For example, our hypothesis, which was first put forward by Johannes Kepler, of an invisible principle called universal gravitation. We know that our idea of it is so right because we can put things in orbits around other planets, right? We can bend those principles and put them to work for mankind. We can split the atom. We can fuse atoms and unleash the potentials of those powers to create change in the physical universe that would not have happened without that creation of the human mind. Now, the sense by which we detect these principles is that creative spark of reason. It's a probe, you could say, we put out into the physical universe. Now, what is the seat of that power? It's poetry. And that poetic faculty is what is developed by art. That is what is developed by classical culture. And it's that poetic faculty that we recognize in other human beings, no matter how different those human beings are, or how different the country or the place or the circumstances they come from are, that generates within us a sense of love. Love for them as a fellow human being and love for mankind as a whole. That quality of love and beauty is nurtured in culture, in music, in art, in drama. It's celebrated and developed in children by the engagement in a culture of beauty. And therefore, it's absolutely indispensable today, given what Dennis referenced, for example, with this culture of violence among children, right? And I know all of you this is on the minds of most Americans today, the kind of ugliness and violence we see coming from children, right? In the Green Movement, children who believe that we should exterminate the human race, in the school shootings, in the brainwashing and decortication of children when we set them in front of screens for hours on end. So this is an urgent question, and I think what I just want to add to this discussion, before I lose my voice, is it's absolutely required that we as a political movement have the courage to fight and insist on a culture of beauty. And Friedrich Schiller said, excuse me, that art is not art unless it's beautiful. And we have to have the courage to insist on that as we go out on the streets, talk to our friends, and organize for the policies that are needed to reform the financial system, to ensure the funding for the Moon Mars program, to fund the research programs we need. We have to insist on the culture of beauty, and we have to fight against this culture of ugliness that's been imposed on our most vulnerable citizens today. And that's why, as Dennis said, that's why we have the Chorus Project, because it's the most efficient way to bring people into a social process around the kind of participation in the creation of a process of beauty which can be shared with other people and communicated with other people. And it's something which changes you permanently as a person, and it's something which develops that necessary spark of this powerful reason by which we as human beings can contribute to the scientific and other progress of our species as a whole. So that's what I wanted to say.
We have a video, I believe, of Daniel Burke, who's our U.S. Senate candidate for New Jersey. He was just at a rally. Well, actually, it's self-explanatory. Why don't we just show it?
Hi, this is Daniel Burke with the LaRouche Political Action Committee. I'm here at President Trump's Manchester, New Hampshire presidential campaign rally, and I'm here with a team of LaRouche PAC activists, and we are campaigning. We're fighting to educate people. We're fighting to give them a sense of the future, of what the next 40 years require from us. So there's tens of thousands of his supporters. There's a small handful of protesters, and in the midst of this you have a desire to do what's necessary, but a grasping about for the next policy needed. So as we're going up and down the lines talking to people, there's enormous excitement about the space program, and there's not much knowledge about fusion energy. There's not a concept about the change that's needed in the world economy to prevent this financial crash from happening. But people know LaRouche, and we're coming to them with something that they're not expecting, which is that the U.S.-China relationship is exceedingly important to the success of President Trump's mission as a president. That it's not socialism, it's not China that's the enemy, it's the British Empire that's committed to mass genocide. And I can say that what people do get is that we can change the culture, like President Trump has been calling for since the El Paso and Dayton shootings. We can change the culture if we give people hope. And that's what the space mission will do. So I want to ask of you to join our movement. Get out here with us. It's a lot of fun. We have new people coming out with us all the time now. And join us in getting signatures on this petition to commit to the Moon Mars mission, which lays out the full LaRouche program for the next 50 years. Get on board with that, and I'm sure that we can win, that we can take the people who are optimistic and defiant out here and give them direction. Please support that effort in whatever way you can, including making large financial contributions to make sure that we can get our volunteers out here. I drove 4 hours to get here. Bye-bye.
Okay, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to now open up the floor, open up the microphone here for questions and answers. I'd ask a few people to begin, at least get yourself oriented to begin to ask questions. But before we get started, I want Sylvia to come up and talk a little bit about the process of organizing, and this largely as a public service announcement for those of you who will be watching this video, but maybe in areas where we don't have organizers. You may want to see why you may want to invite them to come to your state or city. Come on.
Hi, everyone. Well, this week we had a really interesting series of organizing activities. I'm not sure exactly if you wanted me to talk about the 3 days or just one or two.
Whatever you want.
Okay. Well, first of all, one day we went out and it was raining. We didn't get started till 1 o'clock. It was kind of not looking so good. And the first thing that happened after we were out there at a table in an area that we haven't been in since like 2014 was a policeman pulled up and came out of his car and was literally like shaking our hand, thanking us and saying, you know, has anybody given you any problems for being out here? And we said no. And he said, well, good. And he wanted to take a picture with our signs. And he said, if anybody does give you problems, you can use my, you know, my picture. And so this young lady was coming up as he was getting in his car driving away, and she looked really, you know, happy at first. And then she started, you know, attacking me, saying, why is a woman of color defending the president? And she said a lot of very foul-mouthed things, so I'm not going to repeat them here, except that we did try to, you know, give her a sense of what, you know, we represent LaRouche and why we're defending the president. And then she just, you know, started grabbing some grass and throwing it on our table and yelling, and, you know, we... So... I mean, that just showed, you know, to us that, you know, okay, at least there's something going on here. There's a policeman who supports us. There's young people that are obviously, you know, the main thing she was going through is that he's a rapist and a racist. This is what you hear in the media. So it makes sense that a lot of young people are being, you know, targeted. Then we had other people. What was interesting is these two young African-American boys came up. They were college students. But the interesting thing is that they said, why are you defending the president when he's racist? But when we explain who we are, what our fight has been, how LaRouche was a political prisoner, our policies for like development of the world, they said, thank you for letting us know. We had no idea. So it's not all like ingrained. Some kids are totally controlled. Some other kids are just, they're responding to what the media is saying to them, but they're not totally holding on to that. And throughout the day, we had a lot of people who would come up. And, you know, we're really happy that, one, we're intending to go into the college campuses, which is going to be really important for everybody here to participate, because we're going to need extra volunteers. Because, one, we have to keep up our activities on regular fronts and raise funds for our activities. But at the same time, we need people to go on the college campuses to help us, you know, recruit these young people to this program, the Moon Mars program, science, and then the other thing is we've had a series of young people who we've met come out and organize with us. And one of the young ladies went out and she had a really interesting experience. She thought we were going to get attacked. Everybody's going to be anti whatever we're doing. And everybody was shocked that we're there and so happy. People were coming up, firemen. The wife came by later. Oh, I didn't know my husband signed up. The sister-in-law came by later. Oh, those are my relatives, you know. Lawyers came up, teachers came up, Hispanics came up, everybody came up. And so she was so happy to see that kind of response. But then the next day we went to New York City in the liberal area, like Upper East Side, and it was a totally different response. I mean, we were in the wrong neighborhood, according to a lot of the people there. You better get security because you might get shot here. So, but at the same time, you know, it was the better people started coming up. So I would say to this young lady, you know, this is the way it is. This is real life. It's not always pretty, but you have to fight, and you have to create a field where you find the better people. So I mean there's a lot more details, but I don't think you need the details. I think you just got to get a sense that it's electrifying out there right now, because there's so much going on. There's so many things in the world that are happening that a lot of people have no clue, and if they did, they would be here today in this room. So.
So the floor is open for questions. I'd just like to say to people that might be viewing this, the idea is that what we want to see happen in the United States is the kind of dialogue we're trying to show you here, and you're going to see some more of in a moment. Because in America today, it seems to be believed that freedom of assembly really doesn't exist. And freedom of speech is not really freedom of speech. It's only freedom of speech if you've got a powerful media or a powerful clique behind you, or people like you. But you're not free to say things if people don't like them. Actually, the LaRouche Political Action Committee and precursor organizations that LaRouche founded have done this kind of organizing on the streets of America for 45 years, since January 2nd of 1974 to be exact. And what's important about that is that you find that when you go out in the street and you spend time organizing people, that the world that's actually out there is significantly different than the world that's reported. It actually often bears no correspondence to what is reported to you that people say or think. And because the reason that becomes very important is that the issue of truth is a much different one than the issue of opinion. And therefore, elections are very much of a different nature if you're out in the street organizing. And you realize that the issue of parties and factions and popularity is very, very, very inconsequential. But what does matter is it possible that the American people, who are very, very different, can be unified around great ideas? And the notion that great ideas are the province of everybody, and everybody has the right and even the responsibility to participate in great ideas. And that's really the future that we want to see for the society as a whole. So what we're looking at with committees of correspondence, this doesn't really mean, it's not like having a membership card or meeting once a week or something. There may be some elements to doing something like that. But the real idea is, when Lyndon LaRouche began his work 50 years ago, he spoke about his organization as a system of conferences. It was really sort of, people, you'd come around initially, this is 1970, 71, well, where do I join? Well, you don't really do that. Well, what do I do? Well, you go to these conferences, and the idea is that we arrive at an analysis of what we believe the problems to be, or the opportunities are, in how to change the world. I mean, your role is to contribute to that in some way. And whether that means that you find yourself out on a street corner doing it, or you find yourself in a lecture hall doing it, or you find yourself intervening on somebody in a lecture hall who's doing it, doesn't really matter. And the country doesn't matter. The language doesn't matter. What matters is that truth is knowable. And there's a responsibility to proceed to try to apprehend that truth, which is knowable. So that's really what the purpose is of these ideas. So if there's anybody who has a question or a comment, just come over to this microphone, and then we'll just take it from there.
This one? Yeah. Okay. Hello, my name is Clara, and I am visiting from Denmark. I just wanted to ask you, Diane, something, because, you talked about this young girl, Greta, and, she's neighbor to Denmark. So, of course, we also heard a lot about her. And in the media, when we, the normal Danish radio media, they have, shown her as some sort of miracle coming out of nowhere, all of a sudden, and many people at my age look up to her, actually. I'm 21. Many people look up to her and wanted to be at these, speech places she went, and then in Copenhagen. She came to Copenhagen and spoke. And I was just wondering if you maybe could, oh, can you hear me? I was just wondering if you maybe could say something more about who are the people behind her, backing her up, because we don't hear anything about that back in Denmark. I mean, we don't have a clue, actually. So I would really like you to do that if you can. Thank you.
Well, this is actually something we're researching right now to find all of it. I mean, one of the things we discussed this morning is we want to know under whose auspices is she addressing the United Nations. Because it seems very odd, as you say, that some 16-year-old manages to go and speak in front of the European Parliament and go to, I mean, how does a young woman suddenly become a major international celebrity? We are looking at the groups that finance things like the Extinction Rebellion. Not surprisingly, there is a Soros connection and others in London, but I think I'm going to wait until we put out the package of the whole thing. But I would also say that something that I've been thinking a lot about in terms of what happened to the United States in the 60s is that the British Empire never got over the American Revolution. And they wanted to destroy the country. You think about the War of 1812, you think about the War of the Rebellion, where the British supported the Confederacy, they supported the slave holders. What happened in World War II with these difficulties, their delaying tactics to make sure that the war ended after Franklin Roosevelt died, so that his vision of a world where every nation had equal opportunity for economic development was not allowed to come into existence. What became probably very clear is the interesting fact, because of the United States, because of the work of Alexander Hamilton, and the legacy of that, which you saw in Abraham Lincoln, John Quincy Adams, Franklin Roosevelt, Kennedy, the United States was not going to be able to be beaten militarily. And they had not been able to, no combination of nations was going to surpass us militarily. So how do you destroy the nation? You destroy the culture, and you target exactly what Megan said, which is you target what the identity is of a human being. So is there a difference between a human being and an animal? And if you think about what, and one crucial component of that destruction is fear. Anyone who's ever studied, and I'm not an expert on brainwashing, but I see our population, which is very brainwashed, but I know that if you want to brainwash someone, you use fear. You use torture, you use fear. Well, what did we have? We had the assassinations of President John F. Kennedy, and Mr. LaRouche often said that the Warren Commission cover-up of that assassination was even more destructive than the murder itself. Because people, first you have a beloved president killed, and then the guy who supposedly killed him is shot and killed, and obviously that would raise a lot of questions. But then you have a whole government group that issues a whitewash cover-up. So then the message is, don't ask questions. You may be suspicious, but you don't get to know. And then Malcolm X gets assassinated, Martin Luther King gets assassinated, Bobby Kennedy gets assassinated. And it's only now that the family members of all of these individuals are demanding reopening the investigations because they didn't believe the story. So then after that terror-inducing operation, you have the Vietnam War, where we're supposed to measure our victory by how many people we kill, which is unheard of in a war. That's not how we measured victory in World War II. And we killed a lot of people and we didn't win. And you had the introduction of the so-called rock, drug, sex counterculture. Woodstock was mentioned. The Beatles were it was a paid operation to say the Beatles were popular. They had audiences that were paid to scream and yell and make a sensation, and people thought this was a great new thing. So you had a total attack on the optimism of the culture, and people were told, don't try to think about anything bigger than yourself. Just look at Ayn Rand, The Virtue of Selfishness. All you can do is think about yourself. And now you think about what they're doing to children. How did they create a person like Greta Thunberg? I have no doubt that she sincerely believes what she's peddling. Just as the El Paso shooter, and if you read the manifesto, the guy clearly has very severe emotional maturity problems. He talks about this awful Dr. Seuss book, which I can't think of the name of it right now, but I mean, if a Dr. Seuss book is the formative thing of your identity, then but you know, he sincerely believed the world is overpopulated. So instead of having children thinking about how we get to the moon, how we get to Mars, what is my future going to be, can I expect to be a rocket scientist or an astronaut, children are told, you exhaling is destroying the planet, and not only that, your parents, because they refuse to change, your parents are destroying your future. And if it's not going to, if you don't succeed in stopping them, then you're going to be dead in 12 years. So you should be prepared to commit suicide in case you're not dead. I mean, it's really that crazy. And the other thing along with that is all this gender, asking a 6-year-old or a 7-year-old or an 8-year-old if they know what gender they are is really sick. That is abuse. That is abuse. And so that is what's being done to the children of the United States. Now, happily being human, the power of creative discovery, the power of optimism is much greater than the power of these things, which is why I think they have to go to such lengths to suppress the good. We're still meeting many, many people who have no idea that President Trump committed our nation to go back to the moon. That's pretty wild. This is a big deal. A lot of people are going to be involved in it. How come no one knows about it? So the power of optimism will overcome, but I think the biggest battle is the cultural one, and the question of whether we each can find the courage to do what Megan said, to insist that art be beautiful and to insist that mankind is beautiful. The human species is a beautiful species and unique in our ability to become better and better from one generation to the next, which no animal does.
I mean, just a couple of things just in terms of the so-called facts on her. She basically emerged last year, and it was because of the demonstrations that she was doing in front of the Swedish Parliament for climate change. Then what happened was that supposedly in response to that publicity, this thing called the School Strike for Climate began. And then that started in November, and then that's how it got bigger. Then 3 people, I think it was, from Norway nominated her for the Nobel Prize. Okay, and then she's extended an invitation by the head of the UN to speak at the UN. These are just the kinds of things that happen if you're an activist. Now, there's this Swedish financier. His name is Ingmar Rentzhog. Okay, he formed this thing called We Don't Have Time. Now, what he's doing is basically they're parlaying the thing around, and he finances her. But the reason they do it is because they've got another scheme. Now, this scheme involves a lot of things around investing in sustainable development projects, which this guy, Rentzhog, is very much involved in. You could say many things that Rentzhog is a pig, but we won't go into those kinds of jokes. And in any case, the main point is that he's been marketing her. So that's how the thing is largely initially financed. But that's only the beginning of it. The financing for this stuff is being coordinated with people out of London, specifically under a thing called the Green Finance Initiative. Now, they're not coordinating her. They're coordinating the other people you're about to hear about that you don't know the names of yet. And the way this is going to roll out, this is going to be rolled out through the City of London Corporation. There's a guy by the name of Sir Roger Gifford. He's the head of this thing called the Green Finance Initiative. They just had something called Climate Action Week at the beginning of July. July 1st to the 8th. So what's happening is that this is being organized by Barclays Bank and various other banks. Diane referenced some of this earlier. Now, it'll work differently in different places. So like Germany will have a different version of this thing, which will be that Extinction Rebellion organization. They'll do it that way. France will have something different. You know, the French are always going to be a little different. But what's happening is that you're going to get a synthetic movement which is intended to practice what a friend of ours, the late Fred Wills, used to call the doctrine of regrettable necessity. But what you do is you say, of course we would prefer it if everybody had a high standard of living, but regrettably it's necessary for many of us to not. And that's the way that the movement comes into being. It's what when Obama went to South Africa, for example, to Johannesburg, and spoke to the people there and said, well, yeah, you know, everybody wants a car and an air conditioner, but if you guys all get them, then the planet will boil over. I mean, he actually literally said that, right? Now, so that's how it works. So it's a form of benevolent colonialism where there was called activist tourism is a sort of a thing being created globally around a younger generations who were coming along at a time when most of the political parties are not good, and you know, things have ended like that. So it's like ecotourism was, but now it's activist tourism, and so that's the concept around which they intend to make her a phenomenon. So she's being made a phenomenon, and the idea is now for this to somehow drift into the United States, which is a country which is in love with that kind of thing, fads. But there's another element, and the thing that we're concerned about is that what Helga's been talking about particularly is that this attempt to preserve the bubble by talking about $45 trillion or $40 trillion or however many trillions of dollars that Ocasio-Cortez and others are talking about, this is serious. I mean, it's not serious as a proposal, but it's serious as an attempt to try to maintain what can't be maintained, which is the financial bubble. And this seems to us to be the last gasp of a kind of a genocidal lobby that wants to try to use this idea of climate change as a front. So I just wanted to fill in a few facts around her that I thought were important. The other thing to note, which is not related to Greta Thunberg, but is another part of it, is don't let the Jeffrey Epstein story go out of your head on this. Because remember that what was said by Acosta, the former labor secretary, when he was interviewed about this thing, about why he let Jeffrey Epstein go down in Florida when the case happened originally 10 years ago or whatever it was, what he said was, I was told that he belonged to intelligence and to leave it alone. That was in a Daily Beast interview. I think there's a lady's named Vicky Ward, I think. That she'd been writing articles also for Vanity Fair and so on. And the reason I've referenced this is because the Epstein thing is relevant, not because of the sordid side of it that everybody's being caused to look at, which is not actually what's going on in this at all, but because of the way in which the intelligence community, quote unquote, has operated, including against Donald Trump. So when he's talked about this idea of taking down the 16 intelligence agencies, the reason this becomes significant is if you look at British intelligence, not just Christopher Steele and those guys, and not even the guys that headed up MI5, but if you look at how they operate, if you look at, for example, the life of John Maynard Keynes, or people like that, and look at what he was actually hooked into, what the Bloomsbury Group is, for example, when you look at Keynes. When you look at them culturally and you see what they really were, then you realize that what's being done with this climate change thing is a little trick that those of us who've studied the Hitler movement know all about. This is a cleansing movement. The issue is to cleanse the planet of pollutants. And carbon dioxide, rather than being an element, is a pollutant.
See? And you, unfortunately, regrettably, pollute every time you breathe. So, somebody's got to go. And so this is what we're doing. So sort of like it was an old, very old movie called Village of the Damned, which is well known to some of us of a certain generation. And this is kind of what this is more bringing back into the minds of older Americans. But the main point is, this is a phenomenon, a cultural phenomenon, a culture of death that we're going to want to try to eliminate.
Hello. Hi. You'll have to forgive my accent. I'm not a British spy. I have a question around the push for scientific exploration development. And I can't help wondering why so many resources would be given over to going to the moon when some people argue we never went there the first time. Why would so many resources go to something like that when there are so many people on the planet who don't have clean water and clean food? There are so many children in the United States who go to bed hungry every night. There are these really critical, basic human things and issues that are outstanding. Why would we be worrying about going to the moon? Is that a reasonable question? I'm not trying to be clever or facetious,
No,
but...
it's a good question.
Okay.
It's a good question.
Thank you.
Well, it's the best way to solve those problems. That's what I would say. I mean, if we went back, the development of the steam engine was definitely far less expensive than going to space, but it still used a lot of resources that could have been, directed towards alleviating more immediate needs of certain people who were deprived. But of course, the effort was made to develop steam power, and it made people's lives far, far, far better. The same is the case for the moon, for going to space. That's how this project that worked on the economics of the space program in the 70s had come up with this return. They said, I think, either 10 to 1 or 14 to 1. They said that because of the fact that industry became more productive and efficient based on the requirements to go to the moon, that it cost far less than nothing. That is, having that objective, achieving that objective, the result was that because of the new machinery that was required to make it happen, which was now available for other industries as well, now you could make better medical equipment. Things that specifically came out of the space program included, for example, GPS, that's of course very convenient for us, very useful, medical sensing, new types of machining, electron beam welding. I think electric discharge machining was advanced by this. Better precision. So it costs less than nothing in the past, and it would be expected to cost less than nothing in the future. So that's the, I suppose, short and very direct answer. If you want to eliminate poverty and provide people an opportunity to do exciting things with their lives, this does all of those. This will be the biggest economic driver that we can imagine. Space and fusion. We should be spending billions to develop nuclear fusion, and it will be very well spent. It'll be the key to eliminating so many scarcities that we still experience right now. So it's an investment that it would be a shame, very costly, not to make.
But Tesla said we have free energy already.
Well, people say that Tesla said that. Where is this free energy?
Was it not suppressed by Westinghouse?
No, I mean, physically, where is this free energy? Well, we get energy from the sun. We use solar panels. I mean, the sun energy, of course, doesn't cost us anything, but making the panels costs something. The energy in the air, how do we get it? So, I mean, Tesla did work on transmitting energy, and this is what we see with, if you've used those Qi chargers, like the wireless chargers at a Starbucks or something, where you just put your phone down to charge it, you know, that came from something that Tesla was working on. He had electricity transmission in his lab, so he had like a wireless light bulb. You could carry the light bulb around the room and it would be lit up because it was resonant with electromagnetic waves that he had in his laboratory. The large project that he had in New Jersey was a power transmission station. But I am unaware of Tesla himself, as opposed to other people saying things about Tesla, proposing getting energy from some other source. People have brought up to me on this the magnetic field of the Earth. Isn't that a source of energy? Yes, but if you've ever used a compass, and you know how long it takes to get that little needle to even point north, it's just the magnetic field of the Earth is incredibly weak. Does it exist? Yes. Would it be effective to try to use it for power? No. So, I'm not sure where the Tesla thing comes from. To me, if I may be so bold, it reminds me of things like QAnon or other things that suggest solutions in order to prevent actually disruptive solutions from being arrived at by setting your sights somewhere else where success may not potentially lie. That's my direct and honest view about the concepts that are attributed by people today to Tesla.
I'm not a scientist, that was just an example. I'm sure other people are much more well-versed in that.
Yeah, they might, and they might. So I'm just saying that that's what happens is it floats around, and then you know, and so it's an issue because people say, well, could we do fusion? Sounds good. I don't know. I'm not a scientist. Should we do Tesla? I don't know. I'm not a scientist. So you know, I appreciate or I understand that you know that exists as a concern because you say, well, you know, and there is no way around it. You do actually have to look into these. I mean, there's no way based on what I just made claims about fusion that anybody could know that what I said is true. Of course, hearing me say that doesn't mean that you know it's true. You have to look into it yourself naturally. So I wouldn't expect anybody to. Well, you can't. You can't honestly believe something just because you heard it. You don't know it anyway. So, yeah, I'd say just you got to look into these things and then you find out. Yeah, sure.
I'm really glad you brought this up because I think the other thing that's raised by this question is confusion that most people have about what is money. Like, what does it mean to spend money on X versus spending money on Y? And I would ask that people consider if someone is impoverished, something that I've written a great deal about, take the situation in New York City of homelessness. There are at least, according to the New York Times, studies that they didn't do, thankfully, 114,000 children in the New York public schools who are homeless. And that's 1 out of 10. About 42% of them live in shelters, and the rest are staying with other family members. Now, is there a way to solve this by spending money? That is, should we build a whole bunch of housing for them? Well, then what? I mean, meanwhile, you can't even get to the housing because the subway system has disintegrated and there's lead in the pipes because they're 100 years old. And so the question is, if one actually thinks through, how would you address this problem of having this number of children who are homeless? Maybe one would consider, well, how did this happen? Now, in the case of New York, as Jason, I forget who pointed, we have spent an enormous, when you're talking about throwing money away, we did spend a huge amount of money bailing out Wall Street, for example. But that has not actually contributed to the so-called prosperity of the city of New York or the conditions that people live in. If, on the other hand, you said, we really want to figure out how to get to the moon, well, one of the first problems you're going to confront is who in the United States is qualified to do this work. And if we're talking about, as Lyndon LaRouche did, a 40-year program to put a woman on Mars, well, the people who are in these schools where 10% of the children are homeless are the people who are going to be figuring this out. And therefore, the question is, what kind of investment is actually required to transform this? Or I'll put it another way, because it's really unfortunate. I mean, there's such an obsession about money, and I'm not saying this is you, but you think about all these people as saying, oh, all these people are getting welfare, all these people are getting food stamps, this is such a waste, why don't they work? Well, China has lifted about 800 million people out of poverty over the last couple generations. They didn't do this by sending out checks to people. And you see various videos which are very fascinating, because what Xi Jinping has assigned is that people who are regional leaders have to go to the areas where people are really impoverished and figure out what is the cause of the poverty. And he described, he said, you know, the hardest thing, and the translations are probably weird, he said, is if you have someone who's been living in poverty for many generations, is instilling a sense of ambition. And I think that's probably not quite the word, but a sense, again, of what is the identity of a human being. Or you take the situation in India where a 14-year-old girl living in a horrible hut with, I don't know if they have indoor plumbing there or not, says, well, I'm going to be a medical doctor. She's living in horrible poverty, but she has a sense, because the nation is going to the moon, Modi is challenging every single high school student to answer a quiz. How do you get a rocket off the launch pad? How do you put a satellite in orbit? And the students who give the correct answers are all going to be flown to mission control and be there in person when they land the rover on the moon. So you can imagine every child in India, whatever their current living conditions might be, is obsessed with how I want to solve these problems. I want to get the answers to these problems. And there's a directionality to their thinking which allows the transformation of the whole country. Whereas here we don't have that. So, and the other thing is, when we quote unquote go to the moon, or we spend this money on the moon, of course we're not spending the money on the moon. There's nothing there to spend money on. The money is being spent here to create the workforce, to create the plant and equipment, to create the infrastructure that allows us to do this. Now, I would say, and I think this is true and something we have to consider, it's not necessarily the case that doing this means that we eradicate poverty, although it goes a very long way to making that possible. I think we also actually have to take a conscious mission to do that, because there are very difficult situations due to the destruction of our cities and the destruction of the infrastructure that we're going to actually have to think through, like what FDR did when he built the TVA, and they had to go to this horrible malaria-infested Tennessee River basin where the lands were being wiped out by floods and people were illiterate, and they went down and said, no, you're going to love this, we're going to control the river and you're going to have electricity. And people said, what's electricity? We're not interested, we don't want to move. And he had to have library carts and demonstration agents go to this area and do demonstrations of what an electric washing machine could do, and teach people to read. And they also did work shifts which were only 6 hours as opposed to 8 hours, where people would work for 4 hours and be in classes for 2 hours, or so that they could employ everybody and get them involved. So I think it's multifaceted, but my sense is that if we don't go to the moon and Mars, if we don't do these things, we actually will not get people out of poverty.
Okay. Hi. This is Jose from New York. By the way, you were referring to the Lorax, the Dr. Seuss book. That's the one, right? I think the rhyme goes, if you chop down trees, I'll chop your knees. Something like that. but
He knows the whole thing.
but I have two. So, but the Greta situation is pretty cool. I mean, not like good cool. I mean, it's cool as in like nobody knows what they're talking about, especially people her age, but they see it as an excuse to walk out of school. So, you know, I gladly would be all for it. You know, but I think it starts by addressing that the culture of death has definitely been influenced by this idea that your being alive is polluting the earth. So how about you take yourself down and others with you? Make it a game. See how many people you can bring down with you. That was one of the motivations of the Florida shooter. He said, I'm going to try and break a record and see if I can bring down as many people, even more than Columbine. He's trying to break a high score. And he wasn't going to stop. He was going to be a professional school shooter. He walked out and thinking he was going to do it again the next day, somewhere else. And I think to bring it into an even bigger perspective, it's about who rules the world, or who's trying to rule the world. I had an interesting conversation with Tony Chaikin this morning about the Arthur Pike statue. Albert Pike, I'm sorry. And Albert Pike was a disgraced Confederate soldier, a KKK Klansman, one of the leaders, I believe, and yet his statue is still down in Washington, D.C. A congresswoman, I don't remember her first name, but her last name, Congresswoman Norton, in the 90s fought really hard against the LaRouche PAC to keep the statue up. She was saying that the what LaRouche was saying was wrong, right? It's all false. You know, he was a KKK. No, that was all lies. And yet, July 31st, she says, after speaking with the Freemasons, we believe it's best to take down the statue. Why is it that 30 years later, 30? Yeah, okay. 30 years later, she says, you know what, let's take it down, after fighting so hard to keep it up. And my understanding is that his body, Mr. Albert Pike's body, is next to the Scottish Rites Temple, next to an office replica of J. Edgar Hoover. So, what does that mean, right? What is that telling you? Who do they think should rule the world? So I just present that there to you.
Well, Diane, you start. Okay. It's about Eleanor Holmes Norton.
Yeah, in the 90s, we used to call her Eleanor Holmes Snorton, but and she's been there a long time. Very mean. She was a mean person. No, really, she was mean. She would not defend DC General Hospital, which was one of the most important hospitals in the country. It was the one of two, I think, or public hospitals in Washington, D.C. That anyone could go to, and because it was in the southeast towards Anacostia, this very poor area of D.C., they were really top-notch experts, and medical students prayed that they would get sent there to train, because dealing with homeless populations, drug-addicted populations, if you got trained in that kind of area, you could deal with anything. They had one of the best success rates in the world of saving prematurely born infants. They were experts at gunshot wounds, and I remember that case where there was a shooting in the Capitol, and the guards shot the shooter, I think, 6 times. He shot a police officer, a guard. The police officer, and of course there's other details like where they were shot and so on, but the police officer was taken to George Washington University Medical Center, or someplace where you get to go if you're privileged, and the gunman, who had been shot multiple times by the police, was taken to DC General. He lived, and the officer did not. I mean, and they shut this thing down, and she presided over that. So you think of, again, when someone someone who really doesn't like people, who doesn't like you, like Obama when he went to South Africa. And I tell you, if you ever want to get a sense of Obama, just turn off the sound and watch him speak. It's like that. I mean, he's always looking down his nose at everybody. He hated everybody. He hated all of us. And he hated the people of South Africa, and you get a sense of that. So Lyndon LaRouche and James Bevel, who had been a direct action coordinator for Martin Luther King, decided that we were going to get rid of this statue, which was standing at Judiciary Square, okay, the seat of justice in the capital of the nation. And we had rallies, which Dennis led every week for I don't know how many years. We were there on Fridays also, different kind of Friday movement. And we tried to get the city council. We went down to Tennessee. I'll let Dennis tell some of those stories. I and my husband and Fred Hingston, where's Fred Hingston, discovered that we were in a meeting of the Ku Klux Klan and had to make a quick getaway and went to the shopping mall to try and not let them come to our, yeah, there we are. There's Dennis, you see, there's Tony Chaikin, Hosea Williams. Who's that? I don't know who that is. Michael Fitt. Oh, yeah, okay. You can see it was just a couple years ago. And there is the Pike statue appropriately attired by, done by one of our friends. But anyway, no, I got distracted about these. Oh, this Klan meeting. Yeah, that was really terrifying in the South. And we discovered, which was great news for me being a Northern Quaker, innocent, naive person, to go to the South and find so much of this legacy still alive. And I still think every person who lives in New England ought to go to Mississippi and take a tour of a plantation, because it was a horrible wake up. And we ended up in a meeting of Ku Klux Klansmen that we thought was something else. And we were trying to organize them to support getting the statue removed. And after several of the people told us stories about how important the Ku Klux Klan was to keep order in the neighborhood, and how they would be called in to go after deadbeat dads and alcoholics who were beating their children, and that the ones who really caused the trouble were black people wearing white robes, we decided that we had to leave, as I said, before the meeting ended, and pray that no one came after us. But anyway, so this was a long fight, but Dennis, you should say more about this.
Well, we can take two things up at once, because both things are memorable. I actually have what Norton is saying. Yeah, this is what she's now saying, as opposed to what she said then. After meeting with the Freemasons, I believe that the best course of action is to remove the statue and find a more appropriate place for it. Her bedroom. The Freemasons themselves support the statue's removal. The Freemasons themselves support the statue's removal, given its divisive nature. That's new. That's new. All right, so we're not going to tell memory lane stories about this right now, but I will say something about this in relationship to the space program. I was at the first Earth Day in April of 1970 in Philadelphia, Fairmount Park, when they first began it. I had my copy of the Whole Earth catalog with the picture of the Earthrise, as it was called. And I had concluded when I was 17 that you had to save the planet. That's what should happen. There was an album at the time, Marvin Gaye's album, What's Going On, has a song. The last song on the album is called Inner City Blues. And the first line of that is, rockets moonshots. Give it to the have-nots. Well known to anybody that knows that album, and that one is one of the number 6 or 7 on the Rolling Stone list of great albums of all time, greatest of all time. So from 1970, I have heard people, and I used to say, don't give the money to the moon program, give it to the poor. Okay? This is important because, in other words, that has been being said. And the moonshot was shut down in 1972. Okay, so did the poor people get the money? Judging from any street corner, okay? So that's just the first. Now, how does that happen, right? I don't mean how do they not get the money, just why is it that today the same thing is being said, despite the fact that when it was said, okay, back then, and when there were real large social movements that were pushing that, and when the moonshot was actually shut down, people didn't get the money. Because that was never the point of shutting down the moonshot. And it's not the point now. It's just like the people who say that they are for reducing carbon emissions, outside of people like Stuart Brand or Patrick Moore or Michael Ellenberger, or no, Schellenberger. These guys are honest. They're crazy, but they're honest. See, they believe that the planet is being warmed by carbon dioxide, and you got to stop the emissions. So what they say is, we got the money from Obama under his 8 years. We got $150 billion, and we tried to do what had to be done with solar panels and all that, and we have concluded, if you do it that way, you cannot, in fact, both reduce the carbon footprint and sustain the populations. So the solution we believe in is nuclear power, nuclear fission. Now, it's okay. So now we believe that they are wrong about the issue of carbon dioxide, but they are sincere. So those people who've sincerely looked at it have concluded the only way to do this, given the number of people on the planet, is nuclear fission. I mean, and these are the hardest of the hardcore of the old environmentalist movement, okay? I mean, Patrick Moore was the guy that created the Rainbow Warrior ship that used to ram other ships to try to stop them from, whaling and so on. That kind of stuff. I mean, he was doing direct action before direct action was cool. Right? So I'm saying this to say that if you find or you're looking for, and now by the way, you could even be more extreme. You could be an environmentalist who said, well, I believe that the carbon dioxide is a real threat, but I don't want nuclear fission. Therefore, I am for thermonuclear fusion. Now, that was a position we used to hear back in 1972, 73, 74. Matter of fact, some of us had it. I'll say that autobiographically. No fission at all. Don't want to have any fossil fuel related anything. Uranium is related to that. We don't want that either. We want it to be all clean. Well, if you want it to be all clean, thermonuclear fusion is deuterium and tritium in the old model and helium-3 in the second generation. The waste product is seawater. So you would have been campaigning for thermonuclear fusion, full stop, full bore, from the 1970s, and had you campaigned for it, it would have happened already. The reason we know is because we passed the bill through Congress. It's still a law, the federal law right now, as of 1980, has been that the United States is supposed to be committed to a crash program for thermonuclear fusion. Had that been implemented, It was never implemented. It's passed into law, but no money was ever placed behind it. And our organization got that bill passed against the president, Jimmy Carter, who completely opposed us. He signed it into law. Even though Carter was our arch enemy, he signed that into law. It's never been implemented. So I'm saying these things before we talk about Pike because it's of relevance. So you saw the one picture there. Do you have the picture of Amelia and Bevel by any chance? This wasn't the same day. I think this was another rally. But there's another picture I want you to see if we have it. Okay, well, that's Hosea Williams. Hosea Williams. Okay, well, here's Hosea Williams. That's Amelia Boynton Robinson, and that's Reverend James Bevel. I'll tell you who those people are. If you go look at any tape, any video of the Selma March of John Lewis, the person standing next to him is Hosea Williams. Those are the first two guys you see in that march in 1965. They get their heads beat in. Okay? So it's him and John Lewis. The other persons, let me see the picture again, so I just have it up there, is Amelia Boynton Robinson, who was the vice president of our Schiller Institute. She's the lady that got beaten on the bridge behind them and has recently been immortalized in various ways, most notably in the picture of Obama holding her hand going across the bridge for the 50th anniversary. Reverend James Bevel, a mad genius. In this case, I think it's appropriate to use those two terms together. I never like using those terms together, but in his case, was the director of direct action for Martin Luther King, as was already mentioned, and he was the architect of the Birmingham's Children's March, the march where all of the water hose pictures and the dogs and all that stuff you see. That was a march he organized. So they're standing in front of the Pike statue. Pike, take a hike. Okay, Albert Pike, take a hike. This was 1992, 93. Lyndon LaRouche was in jail, and Bevel was running for vice president because LaRouche could not run. He was running for president from jail, but he couldn't show up for events. So Bevel was showing up for him, and I was in tow with Bevel for those events. So we show these pictures. Now, here's the relevant point. So we were talking about the Albert Pike statue, and Lyndon LaRouche did an entire half-hour national webcast around taking down the Albert Pike statue. This is somehow missing from Ms. Norton's narrative. It's not referenced in her narrative, though she was Congresswoman at the time, when these individuals sought to have her work with them to take down the statue. So why is she saying this now? This is the reason for saying this or going through this is there's a thing called the bamboozle. We talk about it here often. We like talking about it because it references both Malcolm X's famous, "You've been took, you've been bamboozled." He used to talk about this, right? And it references that. It also references a Spike Lee movie by the same name called Bamboozled. But it's a thing that happens in America where people tell you a story with great heartfelt emotion about how they want to save the planet or they want to save the poor or something else. And as soon as you hear that, basically either reach for your wallet or a gun, because something bad is about to happen. So the reason I think it's, not important, it's just useful to tell the story about this is that should the Pike statue come down? Well, they're doing it in the context of what happened in Charlottesville. That's what she's doing. She's saying she's opposed to what happened in Charlottesville, but of course, Charlottesville is a completely different thing. That was done as a destabilization of the presidency of the United States. Charlottesville. The attacks now on the Confederacy are being done as part of a destabilization of the presidency of the United States. When we called for this, we were doing the opposite of that. That's why she didn't support it. So the reason we're gathered here, and the reason we're taking up the topics we're taking up, the reason we want committees of correspondence, is because life has become very, very difficult to understand for most Americans. There is a need, the reason for this is that British intelligence is manipulating identity politics in the United States, as it is manipulating religious politics in Kashmir, as it's trying to manipulate financial politics in Hong Kong. And the reason it's doing this is because they intend to depopulate the world by 6 billion people. Now, you can believe it or not, but that is exactly what they are doing. And what stands in their way is that the presidency of the United States has decided to walk out of one important part of that, which is the Paris Accords. The financial forces are trying to sweeten the deal and keep everybody in there by saying you can get carbon cap and trade or whatever else they've got these days. That's what they're doing. And what we're going to do is we're going to form a movement in the United States of a certain intellectual quality that allows people to actually discuss ideas, form hypotheses based on scientific viewpoints, or for that matter, just rational viewpoints, and not be bamboozled or buffaloed into or bushwhacked by crazy, crazy viewpoints, right, that they don't even hold, but will find themselves out supporting with placards, despite the fact that they even know they ought to know better as they're doing it. So that's why we do these meetings, and that's why we're having the kind of discussions we're having all over the country. That's why we go out in the street. And we ask that everybody join us in this and recognize that it is your right to know why you're wrong. You have to defend that now. It's a very important thing for us to understand. We have to help the American people to defend their right to know why they're wrong and not be pushed into being told, you don't need to know that. We're going to have a war here. You don't need to know why. We assassinated these people over here with drones. Well, need to know basis. Believe me, we were protecting you. That's the world that people live in. We don't know why there are mass shooters. What was the name of that video game we just authorized? Or put out on the market? See, so that's our role. And I hope that what we got across today, because I think we should probably bring things to a close. If there are some other questions, fine. But otherwise, we can talk informally. But I hope what we've gotten across today is a character of discussion that we want to encourage in the United States today among our citizens and try to engender as best we can through the efforts of the LaRouche Political Action Committee. I think the only thing I would like to say in closing at this point is that when Lynn talked about a living memorial, he talked about it here in dialogue with some of the veterans of Vietnam in this particular case, and also World War II. What I think he meant for that to be is what we're trying to do today. I think that that's the kind of process that he and others who gave their lives, in the case of Bill Monroe or others who were veterans who fought in the Second World War or other wars of nobility of the United States, I think that's what it was really all about. So I want to just ask that everybody that can participate in helping to build these chapters, build these organizations, become part of what we're doing. You can find online our petitions on the space program and also on the exoneration of Lyndon LaRouche, which is something we're fighting to do. And so on behalf of the LaRouche Political Action Committee, I think we'll conclude the meeting for the day. Thank you all for coming and watching, and we'll see you again next week.